Tonight is a kenes about Shmiras Halashon. So I suppose I'm supposed to speak about Shmiras Halashon. However, I'd like to actually focus on something which might seem to be different. But I'd like to speak not about speaking, and not about listening, but about sight. Eyesight. Vision. Because there's a connection that I hope that by the end of this not too long speech will become very clear. A number of years ago, I had a student who was blind, a very special young lady. She was born blind. She never saw anything in her life. But when she spoke to you, she spoke to you about everything. She spoke to you about colors. As a matter of fact, one of her hobbies was to make things, to make pretty things. She understood, she knew that there was such a thing as colors. She saw the world in a very interesting way because she had never seen light in her life. And she told me that her mother, wherever they would go, would describe everything she was seeing. And she would say, now we're in the car and we're passing a field, and in the field there are stalks, and the stalks are of wheat or of barley. And now there's an orange orchard, and in the orange orchards there are trees. The trees are a little bit round. They're not very tall, but there are many, many fruits. They're green now, eventually they turn orange. And so her mother would describe the ocean when they were near the beach, the crowd of people, the people she saw, how they were dressed, what they were wearing. She was very makbid to always be dressed properly. She had color-coded shapes on her clothing. Triangle meant blue, square was black, another round was brown. I don't really know the exact, but she knew that she wanted to always match, and she wanted to get dressed in the morning by herself without asking someone else. So her mother color-coded or shape-coded the colors because she understood that there's such a thing as color coding. She taught my wife and daughters to braid challah with more than 3 strands, I think 5 or 6. And as she made them, she would say, no, this one isn't good, this one isn't good, this one isn't good. We have to redo it. She didn't see with her eyes, but she saw a great deal. And one of the great things she saw was the good in others. She was not a judgmental person at all. But I realized that there's something about vision that we don't necessarily realize, we don't always recognize. There are many, many ways to see the world. We also were taught to see the world in a different way. By Matan Torah it says, V'chol ha'am roim es hakolos. And the Gemara describes that Klal Yisrael were able to see the voice of Hashem. Hashem was speaking and we saw what he spoke. And I thought that this is a connection. This young lady can't see, but she can hear the description of her mother. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah, and the Torah is a description of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's vision of this world. The Torah tells us what this world is, how to see this world, how to understand this world. And there's a way to look at this world. And the way to look at this world is through Devar Hashem, through the speech of Hashem. Hashem spoke his words, and we saw those words, meaning that we were able to build a new vision of the world based on the words that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used to describe the world and our responsibilities in it. My mother says a young couple moved into a house, and she described how the young lady would sit every morning. She would sit for breakfast with her husband, and she would look across at the neighbor and say to her husband, somebody ought to teach her how to clean her laundry. It's like, look at it, it's all stained, it's all dirty. And every day she would take notice and mention how dirty her neighbor's laundry was. One day she came into the kitchen and she sat down for breakfast and she looked as usual towards the neighbor's laundry and said, Baruch Hashem, somebody finally taught her what to do. And her husband said, no, actually I just cleaned our window. We think that Lashon Hara has to do with speech. But in actuality, Lashon Hara has a lot to do with our vision. The paradigm story of Lashon Hara in the Torah is the story of the Meraglim. And the Meraglim, we're told, spoke evil about Eretz Yisrael, and we know that brought about the Golus of 40 years before we came into Eretz Yisrael. And Rabbi going to Moshe Shapiro, who always says that brought about every single Golus that we've ever experienced. Because in the natural following of events, there should not be able to be a Golus. Klal Yisrael should have gotten the Torah, gone into Eretz Yisrael, and lived by that Torah in Eretz Yisrael. But because of the Chet of Meraglim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to make a transition. He had to make a change in the Seder HaOlam. He had to change the way the world works and actually make a possibility of Klal Yisrael living outside of Eretz Yisrael even after receiving the Torah. And the Gemara asks, Lama nismacha Parshas Meraglim la Parshas Miriam? Why is it that the story of the Meraglim immediately follows the story of Miriam when she spoke about her brother? Chazal tell us, Rishoim elu ra'u v'lo lakhu musar. They saw the consequences of Lashon Hara, and they didn't take it to heart. It didn't change them. And we think that means it didn't change the way they spoke. But actually, if we look at the Medrash, we find a fascinating explanation. The Eicha we know follows the Aleph Beis. The Psukim of Eicha follow the Aleph Beis. Chazal say because Klal Yisrael were punished with the Aleph Beis, which means we were punished with all the different aspects of Bria. The Seder of Bria was disrupted by Klal Yisrael. We disrupted, something happened to disrupt the Seder, the order of creation. And therefore we were punished with the entire Aleph Beis. Where were we disrupted? If you look carefully in Perek Beis, Gimel, and Daled, in Eicha, you'll see that we follow the Aleph Beis. It seems to be an acrostic of the Aleph Beis until you get to the letter Ayin. And instead of Ayin, it appears the letter Pei. Patzu alai pihem. The Goyim opened their mouths against us. The Goyim opened their mouths against me in Perek Beis, in Perek Gimel, Aleinu. The order is changed. Instead of going Ayin Pei, it's Pei Ayin. And the Medrash there says, Lama hikdimu Pei la'ayin? Why is it that the Pei, which represents the Pei, the mouth, precedes the Ayin? The Ayin is clearly the eye. Why is it that the Pei comes first? The way it's supposed to be is Ayin Pei. And indeed, that's what should have happened. The Meraglim were supposed to go to Eretz Yisrael, see the Chesed Hashem, see the brilliance, the power, the force, the generosity, the goodness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they were supposed to come back and tell of what they saw. They were supposed to first see the emes of Eretz Yisrael, and then they were supposed to tell of the beauty and the emes that they saw. But that's not what they did. The Medrash says that the reason that the Ayin Pei comes before the Ayin is because the Pei spoke what the Ayin did not see. Their mouths spoke. that which they did not see. 1 second. If the Speh spoke what they did not see, so it shouldn't be a problem of Lashon Hara. It should be a problem of Sheker. They lied. They came and said an outright lie. They went to Eretz Yisrael, came back and said what they didn't see. The answer is that they didn't see. They told the truth. They told the truth of what they didn't see. They said over exactly what they didn't see. The chet was that they didn't see. Why didn't they see the Chesed Hashem? Why didn't they see the Nisim and Iflos? Why didn't they see the prosperous generosity? Why didn't they see the Shmirah? Because they knew what they wanted to say before they saw. Because their agenda, their interests, did not allow them to see the emes. So they said what they saw, but what they saw was wrong. And what was wrong is that they didn't see. They couldn't see. They couldn't look at the world the way it was. They couldn't see Eretz Yisrael the way it was. They spoke the truth of their perception, but their perception was all wrong. How do we see the world? Well, let's see how HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees the world. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. First thing he created was Or, Vayar Elokim es ha'or, Ki Tov. Vayar Elokim Ki Tov, Vayar Elokim Ki Tov, Vayar Elokim Ki Tov, Vayar Elokim Ki Tov. Every single thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, the Pasuk bears witness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw what he created, and it was good. And at the end, after man was created, V'yar Elokim es kol asher asa v'hinei tov ma'od. And after man was created, it wasn't only good, it was excellent. It was very good. That's the way Hashem sees the world. Hashem created a world of goodness. And for who did he create the world of goodness? For us, for mankind. So then mankind is supposed to see the goodness in the world. We're supposed to look at the world and see the goodness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. The Meraglim were supposed to see the goodness of Eretz Yisrael. They were supposed to see the generosity. But they didn't. The first thing we say every single morning is Moda ani lifonecha melech chai v'kayom. The first thing we say is thanks. Because our first thought, before we open our eyes, before we roll out of bed, our first thought is supposed to be thanks. We're supposed to be thankful for a world of goodness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. We need to see the goodness in order to be thankful. David HaMelech says about the Avodah Zarah, Einayim lohem v'lo yir'u. They have eyes, but they don't see. They have eyes, but they don't see. Okay, that makes sense. They're made out of stone and wood. But the pasuk continues, Kimohem yu osem kol asher boteach bahem. And anyone who believes in them is just the same as them. They can't see. They can't see the world the way it is. Yirmiyahu HaNavi says almost the same words. Yirmiyahu HaNavi says in Perek Yud Beis, Ben Adam besoch beis hameri ata yoshev, asher einayim lahem liros v'lo ra'u. You sit in a house of rebels, that they were given eyes to see, but they don't see. And the Radak says that they saw Golus, and they didn't take Musar. Familiar. It's familiar. That's what happened with the Meraglim. The Meraglim saw Ra'u v'lo lakhu Musar, meaning they saw something, but they didn't see it properly. The chet of the Meraglim begins with their inability to learn from what they see, to see the truth of what things are. The Malbim says that the taina that Hashem was speaking to Yirmiyahu about was that if somebody, the Malbim says, was never taught to see the miracles of Hashem, if they were never taught to see HaKadosh Baruch Hu's kindness, they were never taught to see the goodness, then they don't have eyes. They're blind. It's not a taina on them. But here HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Asher inayim lahem liros. They have eyes. They know about the chesed of Hashem. They know about the consequences of doing things wrong and the consequences of doing things right. They know where things are headed. And they still didn't see. We choose how we look at this world. When we speak about what we see. When we speak about people, we speak about what we see. We describe the world with exactly how we see it, or exactly how we do not see it. We describe the world the only way we know the world. We observe. But how do we observe the world is the question. The chet of the Meraglim began with the way they saw the world. The Medrash says, when the pasuk says, Patsu alai pihem, they opened up their mouth, they blurted out what they saw. This is how the Navi describes, changes around the words from ayin and pei to pei and ayin. He begins with the fact that the Goyim blurted out what they saw. They spoke of the world as they saw it. They saw a world without Hashem. They saw a world where HaKadosh Baruch Hu was not the ruler anymore, where Klal Yisrael was in the dumps, where Klal Yisrael was at the bottom of the barrel. And they were happy to see it that way. 2 Batei Mikdash were destroyed. 2 Batei Mikdash, we're in the middle of the 9 days now. On Tisha B'Av, 2 Batei Mikdash were destroyed. And we think that 2 Batei Mikdash were destroyed for very different reasons. The first one was destroyed because of 3 great Averos, Zecharya, top amongst them. In the first Beis HaMikdash, we didn't see HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world anymore. We looked at the world and saw ourselves. We looked at the world and didn't see Hashem. And the next step was the second Beis HaMikdash, where we didn't see anyone except ourselves. Sinas Chinam is about how we look at the other person. We look at the person that's different, that's not our type, that dresses a little differently, comes from a little bit of a different background, has a little or a lot difference in the way they present themselves, in the way they speak. Different cultures, different backgrounds, different upbringings. We look and we judge. We look and we look and we look, but we don't see. We have to see. We have to open our eyes. We have to see the emes. How does HaKadosh Baruch Hu see us? In that same Moda'ani, we end the Moda'ani. Moda'ani lefonecha melechai v'kayom shehechazarta bi nishmasi b'chemlo. Rabba emuna secha. We thank Hashem for returning our neshama, for giving us our lives back. Rabba emuna secha, great is your emuna. Hashem's emuna, our emuna in Hashem. The Rishonim say, Rabba emuna secha, Hashem has great emuna in us. He looks at us every single day, and he gives us back our neshama. Is it because yesterday was so perfect that we deserve it? Is it because yesterday we did so well that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, okay, let's have another one? Or maybe, perhaps, Rabbi Munasecha means that he looks at us and he sees our potential. He looks at us and sees the good in us. He looks at us and says, I trust you that you can make this day a better day. I trust you that no matter what happened yesterday, today you can do it. There are Rishonim that wake up in the morning. Why do they wake up in the morning? Because Hashem has trust and faith in the human race. He believes in us. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees the world with the tov that he created the world. He sees the tov in us. He sees the tov in us, and he wants us to see the tov in ourselves. He wants us to see the tov in others. The pasuk says, "V'ro kol ami haaretz kishem Hashem nikra alecha v'yaru mimecha." There are two ways the goyim can see us. By the Churban Beis Hamikdash, patzu aleinu pihem. They opened their mouths against us. We saw the world not through the eyes of Hashem. We didn't see Hashem in our lives. They saw a world without Hashem. But the way that the Goyim are supposed to see us is V'ro Kol Ami Haaretz Kishem Hashem Nikra Alecha. When they see that Shem Hashem is Nikra Alecha. When we see the world through Hashem's eyes and we present the world the way He does, and we treat the world the way He does, then V'yaru Mimeka. We should all try to recognize the Shmiras Halashon begins with how we look at each other, how we look at the world. And if we do that, then we should all be zoche to see everyone else as Hashem sees us. The love, compassion, rachamim. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu will let us see Him again. V'sechazeno einenu b'shuvcha l'tzion b'rachamim b'mhera v'yameinu.